Our next keynote address will be talking about critical global challenges and how can breakthrough innovations and smart investment bring optimism, and how can technology unite East and West. Please welcome onto the stage Mr. Andrew Chung, founder and managing partner of 1955 Capital, who discuss how entrepreneurs and investors can invent the future. Please welcome Andrew.
Good morning, everyone. How are you doing? Ooh, that was a little weak. Good morning, everyone. All right, my name is Andrew Chung, and I'm the managing partner and founder of 1955 Capital. We are a global venture capital firm that's based in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, that invests in revolutionary technologies to solve the greatest global challenges of our time. You might have looked at my bio, but what you might not know about me is I was actually born to two uneducated immigrants from China, from Shenzhen Boulan Daipang, who took the road less traveled and moved to Chinatown, New York in the 60s to make a life for themselves. And I was born in 1977 in Chinatown, and by the time I was 6, we moved to Pennsylvania, a rural part of Pennsylvania where there were no Chinese people. I learned English, I worked at my dad's restaurant, and I met this man, Dr. Lipkin, who ended up spending the next 10 years teaching me math and physics. And later, I was fortunate to get into Harvard to study math, and at one point, thought about becoming a professional singer. Because I won this singing competition during college, 世界電視全球華人新秀, a couple of competitions, and I had an opportunity to do that, but instead, I worked at Bain Capital, worked at Lightspeed, and at one point, was chosen by Vinod Khosla, one of the godfathers of venture capital, to join his firm as one of the 6 partners to manage Khosla Ventures. And the reason that he picked me, at the time I was 33, and the gentleman next to me, Pierre Lamond, was 44 years my senior, and one of the founders of National Semiconductor. He was one of the early investors at Sequoia Capital. I was really fortunate because Vinod saw that I thought differently. I was a contrarian investor that liked to go against the grain, and that really changed my career. Throughout my time at Khosla, I was fortunate to be involved with a number of 8 different unicorns, over 30 billion of market value that was created from Lightspeed and Khosla. And most importantly, I benefited from learning from mentors that really changed my life. 2 of them actually were born in 1955, which explains why it's called 1955 Capital. Tony Blair here was 1953, so he came pretty close. Perhaps the thing I'm most proud of, though, in terms of taking the road less traveled, is I was certified as a ski coach this past year, the IFSA free ride ski coach, and it's because my daughter, 11-year-old Arya Chung right here, was the North American Junior Free Ride Champion last year. She was the only Asian that competed at that level. It's something that's really important to who we are as a family and who I am as an investor. And you can follow her if you want on aria.explorer on Instagram. So importantly for us, how we invented our own future as a family, my parents, my children, because I have a 3-year-old also, is that we've taken the road less traveled. We have found mentors, some of the best people on the planet to help chart our journey, who have changed our lives. So I'm going to talk a bit about inventing the future, and because we have such a diverse audience, my hope is that each of you takes something different from what I talk about. I'm going to give a couple of vignettes from technology companies I've been lucky to be involved with, and some philosophy that has influenced the way I think about investing. So first, it's so important for all of us to find something we are truly, deeply passionate about. Investing is hard. Starting companies is hard. Being an executive is hard. And if you're not passionate about it, you're just not going to have as high of a chance of success. And so about 20 years ago, I was working for Bain & Company, actually at the center, Zhongsam, 20 years ago here at Bain, and I was on a case to study sustainability. Really odd, 20 years ago. Energy technology, energy transition technology, and I started to discover that the world was really getting affected by climate change. So here you have a picture of a ski resort that is obviously not looking very well skied. This is Glacier National Park over the last several decades. You can see that the glacier has melted away. The wildfires that are afflicting most of California, different parts of the United States, the hurricanes, and of course in this part of the world, what we see in China and what we see in India and other places that are afflicted by the pollution and causing children to have to wear ventilators leaving hospitals, and more than 1 million people dying every year of pollution-related disorders and affecting the entire healthcare system, there's something that needs to be done. So as I started to move into the investing space, one of the things that I learned pretty quickly is when you start looking at startup companies or you start to think about starting your own, you can't listen to the experts because they're all going to tell you what you can't do. So a couple of quotes that go way back in time. "Heavier than air flying machines are impossible," said Lord Kelvin in 1895. "The telephone has too many shortcomings to be seriously considered a means of communication." These were the experts, right? Lord Kelvin and Western Union, Steve Ballmer, Microsoft. There is no chance that the iPhone is going to get any significant market share. So as you think about all of your businesses, how many people have told you you can't do it? Or, wow, that investment is just ridiculous. It's never going to work. McKinsey, because I worked at Bain, I can poke fun at my friends at McKinsey. They forecasted in 1980, in a very detailed report, the future of mobile subscribers. They were 2 orders of magnitude off. So if you were a business in 1980, charting your course, making decisions, making plans based on that report, you would have missed a complete revolution and lost many opportunities. In my lifetime, I was born in 1977, all these things were not counted on by the experts. On January 1 of these years, 1985, there were no not PCs in every home like they are today. In 2000, January 1st, mobile was not pervasive, despite what you saw in the last slide. There wasn't Facebook 20 years ago on January 1st, 2004, or social media as we know it. Bitcoin, we're having an entire event tomorrow on that. 2008, January 1, it didn't exist. And then TikTok, self-driving Teslas, and then, of course, can you imagine? January 1, 2022, ChatGPT did not exist. Didn't exist. So as you kind of think about the pessimism versus optimism equation, I'm incredibly optimistic because we have no idea 7 years from now, when we come back for the 14th anniversary of CVCF, what will be invented between now and then. But the important thing is it can't be done based on traditional methods. So this chart shows on the y-axis the probability of a technology succeeding, and on the x-axis, as you go to the right, disruptive impact. Most large companies are here in this pink zone. You get compensated at a large company based on taking minimal risk. Because if you take too much risk, you're going to get fired. And so the level of impact is going to be necessarily controlled. Most venture capitalists are in kind of this middle zone. They take, things that are maybe 20, 30, 50% success rate. I would argue that it actually correlates with virtually 0% VC return. Most VCs do not make money. Most VCs are investing in very average levels of risk. It's the stuff that's on the right that I'm most excited about. And I've spent my career studying black swans, things that are truly risky, calculated risks, but ones that truly have a chance to revolutionize an industry. G.H. Hardy once said, "It's not worth an intelligent man or woman's time to be in the majority. By definition, there are already enough people to do that." Michael Jordan said, "Our willingness to fail gives us the ability and opportunity to succeed where others may fear to tread." It's that willingness to fail and take risks that becomes important. So let's talk a little bit about black swans. Well, what exactly does that mean? Like, what is it? How do you find these black swans? What are some of the patterns that you might be looking for if we think about how we find these elusive creatures? Gordon Moore, of course, was the founder of Intel, and I had the pleasure of meeting him many years ago. And we talked a lot about Moore's Law. And for those of you who don't know, in the semiconductor industry, as you continue over time, the number of transistors that you can fit on, the number of devices you can fit on the head of a transistor to be able to power the computing industry increases by a predictable multiple after every couple of years. And that is literally what has caused mainframes to turn into the size of your iPhone. And so Moore's Law has powered this industry. But that alone is not enough to create a black swan. It's in thinking about the exponential curves that are possible in affecting the businesses that you're involved with. How can you have multiple exponential curves intersect unpredictably to create something that truly is transformative? So iPhone's a great example. I mean, I see multiple people have already held up their iPhones to take pictures so far or recording this session. It was a black swan because on one hand, it followed the curve of Moore's law in terms of the improvement in the microchips. The communication ability of those chips was improving at an exponential rate. The optics, the cameras have been improving at an exponential rate. The way they make the glass, the monster glass, enabled Steve Jobs to create the iPhone. The sensors, the speakers, and then of course, how AI affects these devices going forward. So it's the intersection of multiple exponential functions that have created, in this case, the iPhone, which is a black swan. Generative AI, which is going to be a very important topic during this conference, is very interesting because it can create that exponential factor virtually across all industries. In the next section, as I talk about different companies, you'll hear that in many cases, AI is already affecting those, and in many of your businesses, they will. But that's an additional curve to overlay against others that need to come together in concert to create a black swan. Learning from successes and not failures. So a lot of entrepreneurs will talk about, well, if I start a bunch of companies and I fail, yes, I'm going to learn a lot from those businesses. I sat down with Bill Gurley from Benchmark Capital, one of the greatest investors of all time, and he once told me when I was a young buck, you don't learn from your failures, Andrew. You learn from your successes. Because the actual success of bringing a startup from small company to IPO is so complex and so difficult, you have an outsized amount of knowledge when you get involved with companies like that than the people who don't. So I'm going to talk about a few examples. Surgical robotics is an area that I'm very passionate about. This is an intuitive surgical robot. My father had prostate cancer a couple years ago, and this type of robot removed his prostate and saved his life. Now, multiple companies have come in since then to try to take this machine, which is probably about the size of this entire area, to try to reduce the size and try to ride these curves, right, of better optics, better machine learning, better ways of guiding these devices. And a couple generations later, we were first investors in a company called Noah Medical, which is trying to take this room-sized device and reduce it to the size of about a filing cabinet. And using more advanced optics that are already a couple generations beyond the FDA-approved intuitive robot, the machine learning and the guidance systems to be able to get into parts of the lung that currently intuitive cannot get to. And intuitive itself, for those of you who don't know, is a $100 billion market cap company. They have a few % of all surgeries in the world, and so there's plenty of room for growth in this industry. Noah has, since our Series A investment, they ended up raising several $100 million, including from Sequoia, from Hill House, and a bunch of other well-known investors, and they recently got FDA clearance, which is really exciting, because now they are locking in their design to enable the next generation of startups to continue. And we're already betting ahead of that. We were thinking about what is the exponential function that is going to create the next black swan in this category. And we believe that that's size. So imagine you can shrink the size of the robots, not from a filing cabinet and arms that still generally look like the size of human arms. What if we can shrink that down 95% so that you can access different parts of your body like the brain, the kidney, the heart? Where does that 2 to 3% of surgeries go? Is it going to be 10%? Is it going to be 50%? I don't know, and there's no expert that can tell you, which is why I'm excited as a VC to think about it that way. And we think that a black swan event can happen. And it's based at Harvard, where the new engineering school has state-of-the-art facilities that actually are even better than what you would get at a typical large company for them to build these micro-robotic solutions. QuantumScape is another company that I started way back. It was actually out of Stanford. It was a group that was developing an all-electron battery. So as I was thinking about where all of the investors were looking at for batteries, lithium-ion was sort of the common thing in 2010, even in 2010. We looked at something radically different. We looked at an all-electron battery that was solid state, which means you don't have thermal runaway. semiconductor manufacturing practices that can build these devices. And over time, 10 years later, they went public. They were market cap of over $8 billion when they went public. And they've partnered with VW, with Shangqi in China, and a bunch of other companies to commercialize their technology. Now, what was the way that I learned from this success? Well, now that 1955 is looking at the next generation, I'm also going to look radically different, but the other way. So instead of looking at the really sexy part of the spectrum, which is solid-state batteries, I'm going to go to the least sexy part of the spectrum and look at lead-acid batteries and how silicon plates that can replace the non-active material of a lead-acid battery can generate a battery that is 5 times longer life and benefits from all the cost profile as well as the infrastructure for the lead-acid industry, and also the fact that 99.9% of vehicles out there currently still have a lead-acid battery. And so I'm actually taking a bit more of a practical route to market using a breakthrough technology, but again, staying out of the fairway, staying out of where all the other investors are chasing the main path. And the other lesson that we learned was the amount of capital that it took to scale up the technology. In the case of QuantumScape, it was several hundred million which they were able to raise. We were able to produce this at a factory in Pennsylvania with several tens of millions of capital raised, which becomes an important part. Impossible Foods, this is another company that we incubated out of Stanford. In both cases, QuantumScape and Impossible, the first employee was my wife's classmate from Stanford. She's a lot smarter than I am, and she had really smart friends. But we started that a long time ago when the burger did not taste good. 10 years later, of course, many of you probably have had the Impossible Burger and the different variants. We were looking at the next version of that. How do we learn from that success? Well, one of the things about the Impossible Burger was that for many, many years, they were a burger company. And so the question is, how can you create a platform technology that has a lot more flexibility and diversity to tackle all of the food groups and potentially even get products outside of food? And with Nature's Find, we found it. This company has been able to produce 20 different foods across all the food groups. They've launched in Whole Foods. They've launched with Le Bernardin, which is one of the top restaurants in the United States. And we've learned from those lessons of how we were able to successfully scale Impossible Foods and now move it to the next generation company in Nature's Find. A couple of other companies in the healthcare space. We were very early in looking at those exponential curves around gene sequencing and the cost of gene sequencing coming down, and the willingness of doctors to start to think about gene sequencing related genomic products. And so Natera was one of the first to deliver a prenatal genetic diagnosis company. Guardant was one of the first to be able to do tissue-free biopsies, to be able to give you answers when you were taking cancer treatment and whether or not your body was responding correctly. Both of the companies ended up going public, and they're both decacorns, over 10 billion in value. But both companies early on were trying to do early stage detection of cancer in various ways. They weren't able to get there. They still created a market opportunity that has generated valuable companies and have saved a lot of lives. But this early stage screening process has been still something that has been elusive and we're really focused on. So this new generation, again, learning from the past, we immediately started to focus on companies where you could have pan-oncological data, which means it's not good enough to detect whether you have cancer or not. I need to be able to detect whether it's from blood or something else, what type of cancer you had. And so we focused razor sharp on the companies that had the best data on that. And Akua Mark was one of them. They're based in New York. Crave actually took it to a somewhat different level. Again, road less traveled. They had silicon nanowires that actually could detect biomarkers with high sensitivity out of urine. And they've actually launched their first product in Japan. So the last company that I'll mention, and this is, again, steering away from the hype and going towards things that other people are not looking at. When you think about electric aviation, which is going to be very important in Asia, most of the people will talk about the billions that several electric jet companies have raised. And none of them have been commercialized. None of them have passed the regulatory approvals. So we went for a more practical approach. We invested in a hybrid aviation technology where twin engine planes using old airframes that have already been approved by the FAA. One of the engines is combustion, the other one is electric. So if anything happens with the electric engine, you still have a backup. The FAA loves that redundancy and loves that they've already approved the original airframe. So as a result, again, learning from the past successes, they have been able to get to scale and actually break the record for the longest flight for an electrically propelled vehicle for a fraction of the capital raised compared to a lot of the other large players. Learning from past successes and what has worked before. So, again, I hope that all of you in some way take away different parts of my experiences around how you can invent the future. I have nothing but optimism for the future of this region, for the future of the different startups that each of you are working on, for the portfolios that you're investing in, and I wish you all good luck. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for the very inspiring and insightful sharing. Thank you. Please be seated.